that is right around the corner. My name is Don Taylor, and this is Middle Grades Collaborative Conversations. This is I think our 8th conversation this year. This work is sponsored by the Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education. And we gather together monthly to talk about trends, what's happening in middle level education, and how folks are doing in the classroom and in their respective educational communities. Again, my name is Don Taylor. I teach sustainability at Main Street Middle School in Montpelier. And I am going to ask our panel members just to introduce themselves. This afternoon, we're very lucky to have some folks from the Learning Lab, which is also part of the Tarrant Institute. And we're going to hear about the work that they've been doing and how that's impacting teachers and students. So I'm going to start by asking Meg, can you introduce yourself and then maybe hand it off to the next person as we go around?
You bet. Thank you, Don. Meg O'Donnell. I teach humanities to 7th and 8th graders at Shelburne Community School. And I'll pass it off to you, Kev.
Hi, everybody. Kevin Peely-Hunt. I'm a 5/8 teacher on Swift House at Wilson Central School. Pass it over to you, Susan.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm Susan Hennessey. I work as a technology integration coach for the district at Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union and was at the Tarrant Institute for 10 years prior to that. Christy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christy Howell. I'm a program associate at Up for Learning. Excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Rich, and I co-direct the Learning Lab with Susan, in addition to co-directing a thing called What's the Story? Vermont Youth's Social Action Team with a guy named Tim O'Leary through Middlebury College. And I also have a small consulting business called Red House Learning, specializing in helping teachers use what we know about the brain and the nervous system to kind of inform what we're trying to do in our schools. So that's my area of expertise. Good to be here. Thanks for asking us to be here and share.
Yeah, so thank you, everybody. We're going to start with I have some basic questions and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. But again, Susan and Bill are part of the Learning Lab. And I'm just going to ask both Susan and Bill if you just want to introduce exactly what is the Learning Lab and how does it work for middle level educators?
Susan, shall I jump in first? Yeah, okay. By the way, Susan has a cold, so she's coughing. She's not checking her armpits. That's what's happening back there when that's going on. Yeah, to answer what Learning Lab is, it's helpful to go back to its origin, which is it was around 2013 and a couple of years after that with Act 77 and proficiency-based graduation requirements and so much possible wonderful work in the air, thanks to the legislature and also the State Board of Education. And we were working separately and we happened to be at a school and we were doing what people in our roles tend to do is we had some faculty meeting time with the faculty. We had an occasional in-service day, but we were both comparing notes and about how steep the climb was becoming to try to provide high quality professional development as teachers were transitioning to proficiencies, trying to have PLPs be meaningful, trying to figure out how to change the assessment system, the reporting system. And at least for me, I was feeling inadequate and feeling like this doesn't cut it anymore. It's not even that respectful to the educators. And I was feeling a little bit of a period of floundering. And so we started talking in between these sessions about what would it really take to design something that was respectful of educators and really stayed in sync with what they needed. Because at least my recollection, Susan, is our experience is even though we were running well-received sessions, they were always just hovering far enough away from the real action of the classroom that it was, oh, that was nice. They're friendly. Those are some helpful strategies, but we weren't really talking about what was going on day to day in the classroom. And so we did a design experiment, which was how could we close that gap? What would it look like if you designed something that was so meaningful and relevant for teachers that when you showed up to meet with teachers, they were really excited because it was about what was happening this week in their classroom. And so we started with a blank paper, and here were the design features we set out to create. One is that it would be a practicum. The idea would be the curriculum would be your experience this year with your students. And so that's what it's really about. And the second thing is that we wanted to make sure that people were pursuing a question that they really wanted to try to get an answer to. And this is the learning lab part. It's inquiry based. It is a practicum. And what's unique about it is that we ask the teachers to form a network, the cohort, and they share with each other. Here's my question. Here's my question. Here's my question. And Susan and I then kind of organically create a schedule that's helpful and timely in getting people the resources they need kind of on the fly and through each other. So we get these just-in-time resources and experiences. And the other key piece is we ask people to publish their informal, and then by the end of the year, their formal results. And so they create a learning lab report and they draft reflections throughout the year, kind of how's my inquiry question going? What are my students sharing with me? What am I learning from my cohort mates? And so there it was on the piece of paper. Okay, inquiry-based, participatory action research, really not stuffing teachers with new books and lots of articles and threaded discussions about things that are hovering away from the classroom, but good, bad, ugly, belly flops and bright spots, having a community of educators that are really sharing what's going on with their inquiry question and just all the things that are going on. And so Learning Lab is a fairly intimate, really comfortable setting for educators who are ready to really have these kind of conversations with educators from around the state. The two other design features I'll mention, one is that in pre-pandemic, and we're looking forward to reinstating this next year, we do cross-site visits. So if you're in the Learning Lab, you host people who come to your classroom. And primarily, they're there to be helpers, not just observers. Like they know what your inquiry question is. Some of their students have met your students, and it's a chance to have them witness what you're doing, but also give some feedback and offer their insights. So that's the aspiration of what Learning Lab was to become. And I have to say, it's really been mind-bogglingly great, except we ran into a buzzsaw with the pandemic because a lot of this work is asynchronous and done independently. So the times we're together are gold, and we just haven't had as many of those the last 2 years. And it still worked, but we're just eager to get back to really having the few in-time experiences that we do usually have. Okay, Susan, I was supposed to answer question one. How did I do?
That was a lot. Good for you. I think one thing that I would emphasize is that we wanted early on to model personalized and proficiency-based learning, and we knew we needed to task ourselves with that. So if any of you have worked with Bill before, he likes to think about tight and loose, right? Something that's really clear around a target, but then loose within the construct of who brings what dilemma to the table and what resources can we share, because it's a collective, right? And so I think over the years, one of the design features has been clarity around targets and asking teachers, like we would with students, to know what we really mean when we talk about all these moving parts, and then keep going back to it and seeing if our design is meeting the activities that could get them there. And that's been, I know that wasn't part of the question, Don, but for me as a learning designer, to see how that really can drive the way that we can keep tight and loose designs around this thing that really is organic around a network. I think the last thing I'd say is that we did want it to be impactful long-term, but it was also something that, at least for me, this is the kind of professional development I want. So if I was given a chance to design that, I designed for me, and in that sense of knowing that I need a collaborative space to share dilemmas and then feel vulnerable, but also get resources that feel like they're on the ground, like Bill said.
Susan, I'm so glad you added that piece. Oh, go for it. Go for it.
No. That was a great summary. Bill, do you want to continue?
Well, I'm so glad Susan brought that up. Kind of our mantra was walk the walk, walk the walk. Like we never want to be in front of a faculty describing what others should do that we're not doing for them in the moment. So it's personalized. Everybody has their own inquiry question. It's rooted in their ongoing fluid adjustments of that, but it's also proficiency based. There are a set of scales. They revisit them over time. How are we doing closing the gap? And they're letting us know, hey, this scale and this scale, we need some help. We need some instruction. Or so there's that dialogue back and forth in terms of tracking the learning. So thanks for that, Susan.
And if anybody has sort of any questions, feel free to jump in at any time with those or to put those in the chat. I guess I hope this doesn't disrupt things, but I kind of wanted to go a little bit out of order and just ask, how do teachers, you mentioned sort of the asynchronous or how the pandemic has kind of thrown things off. And I was wondering if you could just talk about what's the usual rhythm of your year and how do teachers become involved and what does that look like?
I'll do the rhythm of the year first and then backfill the idea of how that rhythm has kind of been disrupted in the last couple of years. This is mostly an asynchronous, independent kind of experience. Most of what people are doing, other than a summertime meeting with the whole cohort at UVM, we have 4 Saturday sessions that are from 9 to noon. Those we try to meet in person, sometimes depending on people's geography, we do it virtually. And then we have 2 overnights during the year, a single overnight at the Common Ground at the Eco Lodge in Starksboro. And so in terms of the actual time together in synchronous, it's pretty limited. But what we do to keep the group in sync is that we have, once we get to know them and they get their inquiry questions, we have weekly optional opportunities. So there's a regular scheduled menu of like hot topics. These are the things we're seeing people need. So on a Tuesday night, we're going to have a half-hour session. And those who can make it, great. Those who can't, will document it and you can access it later. And that's been a key way for us to stay in sync with people, is these timely, and what's key is optional, no guilt zone, right? If you can't make these, sometimes they're Tuesday nights, some cohorts, second semester, they're like Tuesday don't work anymore. Let's move them to Thursdays. So there's this kind of regular way that we stay in sync that has people have plenty of breathing room. And the rhythm of the year is, it takes a while for everybody to figure out their inquiry question. What do they really want to spend a year pursuing and making that specific enough? And while people are figuring that out, we do a lot of playful things to get to know each other, because we really resist handing out the book or handing out, this is what we're all going to read now. I mean, we do at times give lots of resources, but it's more, we trust that if these relationships are good and everybody's being real with what's going on, it's remarkable the synchronicity that happens. And so then once people have their inquiry questions, our community is rolling and they're really getting to know their students, we do begin thinking about visiting each other, having students meet each other to share what they're pursuing in terms of inquiry questions, and really beginning to roll up our sleeves with, hey, this is what I thought I was going to do, but holy cow, this is what's happening. And then kind of pulling the group together, either for a dilemma protocol, a tuning, some kind of collaborative practice that's attending to the patterns of what's happening. It's really a dance of being in sync with what people need and continually bringing them back to what matters most, which are our learning scales. But we start with them and what matters most. And we have people go public with their results, and whether that's with their faculty and colleagues, or it's a blog post for the Tarrant Institute, we really want it to be, it's okay if your research shows you that your idea doesn't work that well. In fact, that might be a brilliant piece of information for another school system to know this year. And so we really ask people to go public with their findings, and we create a wide variety of avenues for them to do that.
I think, Donna, part of the question was in some ways how it's changed. So, we're trying to launch our 6th cohort for next year. So we've got 5 years under our belt. 2 of those were impacted, obviously. And I think one of the design features that we really knew at heart we wanted to build on in the beginning was how to involve your students in a way that makes sense from your own context and their grade level and their understanding of what's happening. And so in some ways you're not doing something to them, but you're inviting them in to know that you're a learner, right? And that you're trying to figure out what's going on with your own inquiry. And sometimes that means you even have a group of students who consult with you, right? And we knew that kids were hungry to meet other kids, just like teachers are hungry to connect with other kids across the state. So we were building based on sort of the backs of these really amazing teachers, two of whom are sitting in the room right now, who've been in Learning Labs. So I'm excited to hear from your experiences from that. But we had to pivot to how can we get kids to talk to kids and to understand what's happening when teachers are trying to make pedagogical moves and something that they really feel powerful about, right? This is a burning question for them that some practice that they've probably already been doing, but what's the slice of it that could make it better, make it more equitable, make it so that students felt empowered? Like, what's that thing that I can do that I can change? And then to be vulnerable enough to let your kids know I'm doing this. How can you give me feedback around data collection? How can you give me feedback even around data analysis? And then how can we share that with other schools, because we might be able to go on site-based visits. So those visits were super powerful, and we were hearing back from kids and teachers that that was one of the key components. One of the most difficult things to do, even in pre-pandemic times, because how do you get kids in the back of a van without signing your life away? Like, how do you get a sub to even be able to be there for that? But we would all sort of pitch in together and figure out ways to do it. And sometimes Bill and I would go. I know we had an amazing visit at Williston from folks from People's Academy, other folks from Burke at one point. So it was hard enough for teachers to find time during the pandemic, but to take that step to invite their students into the space in those really meaningful and authentic ways, that was probably the biggest challenge that I think we've all faced. And I can't wait to get back to a place where we can do that more.
Awesome. I was thinking about asking another question from the script. I was initially going to go with that one about like how do you work with students and teachers with that partnership piece. That's one thing we talk so much about on this, our monthly chats here. But Susan, you just nailed it. So thank you for that. I mean, I know I have my own experience there, but can you talk at all about how Learning Lab, from what you've heard, have improved teacher outcomes and just outcomes with their students, and what are some of the celebrations that you've heard come back to you from people who have participated?
Great, thanks for that, Kevin. We recently, in getting ready to kick off next year, we looked back over all the years into the different cohorts and the different questions, and it was affirming to be reminded of just the number of people who have said in their own different ways, I don't think I've ever had a year where I've stuck with anything, let alone a single question that I keep coming back to, maybe tweaking a little bit here and there. And I have to say, one of the reasons we see so much evidence of a positive impact on teachers, partly just they're part of a community that's a little bit separate from the regular community. So it creates an enclave for them where they can really think out loud and process in a way that perhaps they'd be a little bit more guarded in their normal setting. So I think there's a catharsis thing that happens for teachers. But I also think this thing of partnering with students, and I have to say, we work with some people who that's their bread and butter, partnering with students. Like, that's the coin of their realm. But for most people, it's a little bit of a new thing. It's a stretch, the idea of sharing with students what you're exploring, and then, asking them not just once in a survey, but actually having a dialogue over time and including other schools. Not only the power of sticking with a question does it have positive impact, but the idea of students seeing, oh, look at this person knocking themselves out, and oh, we got to travel to it. Wow, teachers actually are trying to get better at this. They don't necessarily know that. And I think there's a magic to that loosens things up. And we could talk specific in terms of, since everybody does a Learning Lab report, we have lots of examples of things. And one of the things we ask that they do, in addition to share their data and their findings, everybody shares maxims. So just short statements like, okay, these are my boiled lessons learned. And those are always really powerful. And then, like, what are your best resources that you could share, or words of wisdom for anybody who would be exploring what your inquiry question's been about? And just poring over those the other day, seeing the lab reports, feeling incredibly good. Let's put it this way: so much more powerful than what could happen sometimes in PD. Yeah, we've been here all year. We kind of have a little reflection at the end, but how do we really know whether they even got into the classroom? But everybody in Learning Lab even if it doesn't go well, and it's okay if it doesn't go well, that your performance in this year-long practicum, it's not about whether your research is glowing and you have great data. It's about what do we learn together. And since the learning is right there in the classroom, it's got a rawness to it that it really seems to stick and have impact in ways that I haven't experienced this level before doing some other work that I've done. I don't know if that was too general, Kevin, or if Susan, you maybe want to talk specifically about some impact we've seen, or.
I'll say hi to Joe first, but yeah, just a couple examples. Good to see Joe.
Joe.
I was thinking about a fifth grade math teacher at Charlotte Central School who was interested in math menus, but math choice, and was worried about the paralysis of too much choice. And so she was just trying to figure out how could she, and one of the things that was so clever on her part was to say, the special educators in her room, she just asked them to look and give feedback based on just a simple Google form. But had she not had that kind of structure set up so that she knew she needed some feedback, she wouldn't have known what was working and what was not working, because you're busy running. So just that idea that you're forced to collect data in some ways, forced is kind of a strong word, but that I thought was really like wonderful feedback about how her students were doing and how she could adapt what those menus look like and the structures and the schedules for the day. I think another one that always stuck with me is at Middlebury Union Middle School, a teacher doing negotiated curriculum for her social studies class, right? Excited about that, but she was also team teaching with a special educator. And so they were wondering about what it would look like if one of the kids on her caseload or two could be in that negotiated curriculum group. And what would it look like in terms of just watching the behaviors and the on-task time and the things that special educators look for when the kids were already like behind the scenes and knew a little bit about what was going on? How would that impact that? And so again, were able to partner and have some real data to just say, what did this look like? Like we could step back and didn't need to give as much intensive supports because these kids were part of feeling like belonging, right? So when there are indicators like that, that feels really powerful. There's also just, we know we can trust teachers' guts when they just talk about what does it feel like when I know that little shift in that dilemma protocol that I did on that Tuesday night when I was exhausted made a difference the next day. And so the next time I'm together with this group, I could say thank you. So, we can see it from that lens too.
I was going to jump in with a quick question. First of all, it's so lovely to see you guys. And I told Don, I was like, yes, I can't wait to see Susan and Bilka. Because I'm coming off of a year of doing Learning Lab last year. And I just want to say this one thing about, this isn't part of our question necessarily, but something I have come to value so much has been the chance for us to connect as educators across the state. Feels like just doing this, like doing the middle grades, having these conversations. I participate in another group that meets from around the state, and it fills it fills a bucket. And I'm realizing that my first experience with it outside of middle grades was with Learning Lab, and having this regular cohort of people that I get to connect with is incredibly powerful for your practice. And I just, the pandemic has allowed Zoom to be a way that we connect as educators, so that we're not stuck in our silos or just with the people that maybe we've been with for a long time, but we step out of our zones a little bit. And I just really appreciated that. And it just hit me while we were sitting here. But I was curious about what are some of the projects that you're seeing now? And I would imagine after 5 years, you must start to see overlap or alignment of certain projects. And I wonder what that says about what's trending. What are teachers needing? What's the need that keeps coming up for them?
That's a great question. And definitely within the last couple of years, an increase on social emotional learning. And one of the interesting pieces of that is the Learning Lab is really open to any age group. When we first started, it was definitely middle school because that was kind of the lane, mostly of the Tarrant Institute. And as we've gone, we've had some high school teachers, we've had some earlier elementary, and what we've been, I was a little surprised by it. It is like no problem it's like everybody's having similar, even though high school folks a little different focused, elementary, we have a couple of teachers at Burke this year who are focusing on social emotional learning, and the elegant design they've been doing with their young, like first, second, like really young, but to see how skillful they're doing it and how those students have really picked up on that and show evidence of transfer, not just within class, but to other settings and home, has been hugely important for a high school teacher to hear, like, wow, I don't think my students can do this, and yet you're taking it on at your age. So that's one thing I would notice, Susan, in terms of a pattern over time, especially in the last couple of years.
No, I'd second
yeah.
that example of it's a collaboration with a kindergarten and a second grade teacher along with an interventionist. And what they were looking at is they'd been trained in zones of regulation, but they were trying to figure out how they could do things that would help the kids to know self-regulation so that they were ready to do their project-based learning unit that's going to come up after vacation, that they'd be able to have the skill set to be able to do that. And this is a teacher who's done Learning Lab a couple of times. She was a 5th grade teacher and then a 3rd grade teacher. So she has like this breadth of knowing what could, but I was watching the middle school and high school teachers while that group was talking about these moves. And, you know, somebody who's doing place-based learning and wants to be more personalized within that, but knows that kids need to regulate when they're outside and inside, was leaning in and saying, let's talk about this curriculum, right? What does it look like when we can really focus on that, the emotional readiness for, I even hate the word self-regulation. It's more like, what are those skill sets, but also the recognition of yourself, just not metacognitively, but where you are in your body. It's like, oh, that sounds like a 7th grader, like a 3rd grader, like a 1st grader, and how can we adapt these moves? So I think there's always that idea about engagement in spaces where self-direction is needed. It seems like it comes up over and over again of how can we scaffold toward that in a way? And at the same time, how can we convince everyone in our system that kids are ready to learn like that? I do think, Megan, your cohort, pardon me, we were right in that moment of what does it look like to engage kids in hybrid learning? What does it mean to have difficult conversations? What does it mean when you can have a Socratic seminar or other ways that you have protocols for that? It's stuff we've always done in the past, but in that new context, it was so much more important. And I think people are still swimming in those pools too. But overall, it tends to be more about engagement and self-direction in these pedagogies that we all care for.
Susan, I'm glad you brought up that engagement, because that's true throughout all the years. That's been a theme. It's manifested in different ways. And in the last couple of years, what we've been kind of taking on as our own inquiry question and working with each cohort a little bit is the question, what are the indicators of deep learning? And because we have lots of standardized tests, and like them or hate them, wherever people are, there they are, and they're measuring things and with a certain degree of validity and reliability. It's like that lane seems to be taken up pretty much. But it's been exciting. It turns out, at least the educators we've been working with, it's a fascinating idea, like what really are the indicators of deep learning and how are they sometimes counterintuitive? You know, sometimes people might look like they're napping or they're not using their time so well, but actually that might be a sign that something's churning underneath there. And just trying to think more about what would be in a way to assess indicators of deep learning and how to have a vocabulary around that, rather than always getting hemmed into kind of short-term learning targets that people learn in just a few weeks. What are those indicators of deeper learning? So we're kind of in the throes of that as well.
Thank you very much for that. I kind of had a question for Kevin and Meg. Can you talk just a little bit about your experiences, or if you feel comfortable doing that, maybe about the question that you asked and how that's influenced your practice?
Want me to go first, Meg? Okay. Yeah, we had it. The year I did it was actually the year that, COVID hit. So we had to like kind of, I hate using this word over and over, pivot, middle of the way and figure out how we finish. And luckily we did get some of the site visits out before, while we were still able to. But yeah, I actually partnered with one of my teammates, Amanda, and we looked into, our inquiry question was around, how can we best develop this project-based, curriculum around sustainability in the UN SDGs to increase student engagement and community involvement. So that was that was the crux of it. And we were, this was coming off, I think about at the time, a year or two out of MGI, where our team went to MGI and established that we were going to have sustainability just be part of our core curriculum. So it's still kind of in its infancy stage, especially during Learning Lab. So we were able to dive in, tweak it. And like I think Bill was mentioning before, just that ability to have this, focus throughout the entire year and really dive into it has helped us, better develop what that looks like on our team. But just speaking in terms of, what's already been said, like the model of what project-based, proficiency-based, flexible, personalized learning, like we got to feel like what that's like as learners with Bill and Susan facilitating it, and got to like see how they modeled how do you actually facilitate this type of learning. So that was really powerful just to see as an educator, just being like, all right, I'm able to peek behind the curtain here from a learner's standpoint and see like, and what I really appreciate is how just transparent Bill and Susan would be like, hey, like this was tough to deal with, or this went really well. And just like being super transparent with us, that was awesome, because then on our end, we're trying to implement this stuff. We know where to look for those pitfalls, and we know where those high spots are going to come in, so we can be better prepared for them. So that was a huge piece for us. And then I can't say enough about, for me, the thing that stands out the most is just the connectedness and community, and just getting, again, just that whenever you're able to hear from other educators and pick their brains and get ideas and get re-energized and invigorated by somebody else's thinking, like I think that's where, teachers stay really lively in the profession, and where you don't get stale and you don't get grumpy, because you're just hearing all these cool things and they're like, I'm gonna try this out with my kids. And it was so real. It wasn't like, Bill and Susan both mentioned, it wasn't like based or rooted completely in theory, but it was more practicum. It was like let's hear it from the professionals in the field. And it's almost like, all right, we're all kind of guinea pigs for each other. I'm going to try this thing and then give feedback to the group about what went well and what didn't go well. And then we got to hear that from, the 6 or 7 other participants. And that's like, that collaboration alone is crazy powerful. And again, like, I know like those meetings were always optional, but it's like, you wanted to go. Like, I never felt like, oh, I have a meeting tonight. Like, I wanted to hear what was happening in Orleans. I wanted to hear what was happening down in Middlebury. Like, I was excited to hear like what kind of successes or challenges they were running into, so then we could bring it back and try it with our own students. So yeah, overall, I would just say like the process and again, for Amanda and I to be able to really dig in, a big thing we did that we really should have been doing all along, but was really getting into like the engagement survey, and that Bill and Susan helped us to create this form to give to our students to figure out, all right, how engaged are you? I'm like, why didn't we even start with this? But it's like those simple things that just they allow us to kind of get away from ourselves and like ask this question, like ask the kids, how engaged are you? Get the data. And it was really telling. And then we were able to take that feedback and tweak some things, and we were able to communicate with our families about it. And it definitely just like opened our eyes in terms of the way that we're doing things on our team. And we were just excited about changing stuff. We want to keep our kids as engaged as possible and keep that momentum moving forward. So we still utilize a lot of those pieces today. Meg, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kev. And boy, I can't echo enough just that idea of the power and support of connecting with teachers from around the state. I'm like a little misty, because I'm like, oh, I wonder how everyone is. Like, how did they all do? Yes, Bill. I keep stepping on that at home. I have that at home. So my Learning Lab experience was in full, like we were in hybrid, but we were full remote. And the title of mine, I just had to go look for it. That's why I was panicking a little bit, but it was like slowly, I literally spelled out slowly strengthening classroom relationships, one norm at a time. I had an incident on remote learning that really jeopardized my, or just revealed to me how fragile our student relationships are. And we establish norms at the beginning of the year, but then we don't really go back and revisit them. And I was just thinking about like, oh my gosh, every new theme this year, I'm revisiting our norms. And I can attribute it. It's like, it's interesting when something becomes a habit for you, when you trace it back to what was the origin of that thing. And it was that I reread our Brave Space poem. And so I was really trying to dig in with kids, like how do we build norms, and then how do we hold on to them? How do we practice them? And I had about 4 students who were working with me as my learning lab team, and we had a couple of opportunities for us to connect remotely with other schools around the state, and that was a cool experience. But it does make me wish, like, I want to have that opportunity again. I want to have our kids connect with other kids from around the state, because if I'm imagining, and I'm sure you guys probably think about this too, if the adults feel this way about how we can connect and like support a community of teachers in remote, how powerful that can be for kids, right? That it's not just their community in their classrooms, or in their school, but really connecting with kids around the state. And so I just, it was really around helping kids to see where those positive, how do we foster positive relationships, and how do I honor their voice continually in what we're doing. And we built this slide that we kind of stole from MGI that we use at all of our morning meetings. And that the kids this year were like, where's our slideshow that we did last year? Can we just go back and do that? I was like, yeah, great idea. Let's do it. So it's just been fun to, revisit that. So it was great.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I think those are not only powerful stories, but they make me think about, the needs of my students and how we can be working together to address those. And I just want to make a couple connections. I did have, as we start to get near the end of our conversation here, I had mentioned to Bill and Susan, I had asked them, what are some of the trends that you've been seeing? Oh, and Bill, you kind of answered this when you talked about social emotional learning. But I also I wanted to maybe add a little bit to that question. And today I had a group of 6th graders, and I don't know how this happened. It was probably my fault, but I asked them about their remote learning experience, which was 2 years ago. And they proceeded to spend the next 35 minutes commenting and talking about it. And I was flabbergasted that they were actually listening and engaged for that length of time. And in the middle of it, I said to them, hasn't anybody ever asked you about this? And they said no, they hadn't been, like, quote unquote debriefed on it. And my question to you, sort of relative to that, is what are you seeing, not only with the social emotional learning, what are some of the trends you're seeing, but also how have you seen the relationship with technology? Pre-pandemic, everybody was really about, the one-to-one, Chromebooks, and was very enthusiastic and encouraged by that. How have you seen sort of the paradigm of technology and kids influenced or impacted by remote learning? And do you have any thoughts on that?
So I'll take the second part of the question just quickly around technology. I appreciate my partner in crime over there doing the nose thing. I think one of the things that we relied on was the fact that people knew how to Zoom and that kids were more comfortable in that space. Even if they had their cameras turned off, they were ready to meet others because they had been sort of trained within that space. So for them, just being excited to come into a lightly facilitated way to be able to say hello to each other with some questions, again, still kind of uncomfortable. But as soon as we would step back and let them start to chat or talk to each other somehow, it was as if they were just hanging out in a cafeteria in somebody's school. So I think from the kids' perspective, the fact that they knew how to Zoom and they'd been part of that, and then they were kind of let loose to be able to play in that pool was helpful. It reminded me too that a couple of years ago, when we were trying to pivot MGI, we needed, it's such a key component of having students as consultants. And so we tapped into our Learning Lab students because they'd been trained and they were ready. They signed up and they were stipended to be able to work virtually through MGI that first year when we were in the pandemic to be those student consultants because they were confident within the technology space. That being said, we know that when we think about design and we think about even moving Learning Lab into sort of a national audience, that we still need those in-person connections. Like, this is important, but if there's a way to gather people so that they can feel like they've connected, there's no, we can't replicate that same kind of experience. Meg, I know we didn't get a chance to do that during your year, and it really made a difference. I mean, I think there was still that intimacy that Bill was talking about, but again, I don't know, the fact that I get a chance to see these faces and these people who I care deeply about today through Zoom, like I'd rather do this than drive, down to Brattleboro.
Thank you. Bill, did you have anything to add?
Not really. I mean, I'm a bit flummoxed about where we are right now as an education community and where it's going and what the patterns are. I mean, I'm humbled, I think, like we all are. Wow, who knows what? On some days I feel like, hey, maybe Humpty Dumpty is broken enough. We don't have to put it back together again. We can kind of start doing something a little different. And my hope is that maybe we can get a lot more people getting involved with Learning Lab and take some pressure off curriculum coordinators or all those people trying to design carefully constructed PD that runs into so many challenges. Like, can we have a ground up surge of people forming network communities that are intimate, don't turn into dud PLCs, and just let people try to really figure out with each other how to make things work. I think in some ways we haven't never been better prepared for it in terms of the skills people have, in terms of the technology capacity, and I think even in terms of the people being flexible. But I also think unless we all get like a month-long hibernation nap, I don't see how we come out. I don't know how we do it. I just think I wish we could all just nap for a month or two and then come back afresh, because I worry. I just feel, especially for administrators, like, gosh, they're already trying to plan next year. Like, how do you even do, I'm all for a new Humpty Dumpty, not just putting these pieces back together again. And some days I'm hopeful that's what's about to happen. Other days, it's a little darker than that. So I don't know. But I'm glad we're in this lane to try to figure it out.
And,
Well, oh, go ahead, Sue.
So I just really briefly, teachers needed social emotional connections too. So when you hear from Megan and Kevin around just that network connection, I feel like that's what we were providing in that space. I mean, we recognize that our learners would bring a whole bunch of resources together that were pragmatic, but they'd be there for each other. So it's sometimes an easy gig once you get the cohort together to just do the facilitation. But that social emotional learning for adults, I think, is baked into the design.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. And this next question, this will sort of be the last one for tonight, but I just want to hear from everybody who's in the conversation. And the question, again, that I had mentioned to Bill was, how do you see our way out of this? And I think when Bill talked about we all need a nap, I'm personally, I'm thinking about, this is the third year in the pandemic. The first year for us was remote. The second year was pod or hybrid. And this year we've gone back to, at least in my district, all in person. And we're seeing, again, numerous challenges, right? I think we can all agree that there's been numerous challenges. And I guess just from your practice or from your learning community, if folks could just maybe give us some insight about how or what you think is going to sort of direct us out of this, out of where we are now in terms of, if Humpty Dumpty has fallen, why did that happen? And how are we either going to create a new one or are we going to make the repairs? And I guess I'll start by just saying from my experience this year is that I feel like project-based learning is absolutely critical and essential, and that kids need to be doing now more than ever. And as we've mentioned several times this evening, doing that in conjunction with not only their peers, but other adults, so that they can have as many experiences as possible and not just returning to the classroom as normal. I just think that project-based learning, community-based learning is going to be critical. And then just one more step is developing that youth partnership and leadership opportunities for kids to regain some of those social, emotional, and transferable skills that they might not have throughout the pandemic. So that's where I think my practice is headed. And I guess I'll toss it off to Meg, maybe. Can you answer this question? And then you can choose somebody else to kind of move the conversation forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Don. I'm just sort of cracking up because it's like the day before break. Like, it's like this big, 8,000-foot question, 12,000-foot question. But ironically, we were just having this conversation out at Snack today. And, where our whole administrative team is basically leaving, and there's, upset. The apple cart is totally upset. And Billy, I'm wondering too, how broken is it? And I've been listening to one of our webinars from a couple of weeks ago. And Joe, you in your infinite wisdom talked about that North Star. Like, what's our North Star? And middle level has a North Star. Like, we've always believed certain things. And to me, we don't need I guess I'm thinking about this from the lens of who our next administrator is, but it would be really powerful if we as a community, whether it was kids and teachers or start with teachers and get our kids' voices in there. But what is it that we value? What is our North Star, and where is it posted, so that every year when the schedule comes up or these things come up, we're not being reactionary, but we're just like, hey, these are our pillars. This is what we believe and value. And we can test changes and shifts in education against that. And I just think the pandemic has made our footing pretty considerably shaky, and depending on who's at the helm can make it feel a little shaky. And so I don't know, that's something that I just want to chew on. I just want to think about how do we articulate what our pillars are and hold on to those. Let's see, Christy, do you want to go?
Yes, thank you. This has just been wonderful to listen to and really inspiring. From my position at UP, I would always go back to listening to youth, and just what Don spoke to. The students saying it was the first time someone had asked them about their experience with remote learning. There's so much wisdom there in what youth have to say and what they've experienced over the past 2 years. And with every school that I visit, whatever the project is, whether it's around wellness, equity, sustainability, just getting the youth perspective about these years is just so valuable. I was at a meeting today with youth at Winooski, and 2 of the school board members came to the meeting, and they just listened. And I think it was incredibly powerful for them to hear firsthand what the student experiences. So just putting that at the forefront of every conversation, every decision, what do the youth have to say about this experience? Because there's so much wisdom there. And I'll pass it to Kevin.
Thanks, Christy. The 2 things that come to mind for me, one's out of a page from Alex Bennett's book, but just that holding both each other with adults and our students with unconditional positive regard, and having that be our footing, and then just always remaining curious and open-minded, whether it's about how we're doing things or about behaviors. Lead with curiosity always. I think that's really going to help us out of this. All right, Joe.
Hi, I would say reciprocal relationships are the thing about learning. And as Meg said, that we do have some elements that we have been going towards around middle grades for decades. What's different is the relationships that we've had with the students in the last few years, and whether we're listening to how it's been going for them or not. In the setting I'm in, I think that Humpty Dumpty has fallen and is cracked and beyond repair. And yet my district is building it right back the way it was. In fact, it's getting a little less flexible than it was before. So I don't know that we're listening. I don't know if our relationships right now are genuine with our clientele. Instead, we're just talking to each other about the way it was and the way I'd like it to be, adult to adult, and what's good for me. How am I going to make it? And I don't know that we're listening to what the folks that we're working with, the young people, anywhere near enough. And that's my thing right now is let's try to have a reciprocal relationship with the folks we're working with.
And Susan?
On to Susan.
Good time, Joe. Thanks. Joe, I want to piggyback on that in terms of sort of trusting the educators with whom we work to know if we have a little bit of structure and then get out of their way. They know, many of them know what to do to create these learning experiences that are really powerful, that lead to transfer. In my district right now, we were able to give the 7th grade team, is pretty high functioning, a chance to actually team together. They just didn't have time. Like everything was sucked up with intervention and flex time and getting back to academic recovery. We gave them 2 or 3 afternoons and they created an egg drop challenge. They've been doing it for years prior, but they just hadn't done anything like that with their kids for a while. They were really worried about behaviors because we know in the social emotional like trauma stuff. But because they had that planning time and they tried to tie it to their PBIS and pride things, they said when they reflected on it that day, they still had a lot of energy. They were still really happy with each other. They high-fived me. They said, we had a behavior-free day. And they haven't had one. They haven't had a behavior-free day in 2 years, right? So that goosebumpy thing of like getting out of the way when people know best practices. And at the same time, this is a team who does kid talks and works with interventionists in a way that they know their kids and they know how to use that time together. So I just want our whole district to just come as a fishbowl and watch the 7th grade team work for both angles. That's my way out.
I love what everybody said. I'll keep it short and say that I think that we've been doing school as a marching band for way too long. And when it gets hard, like we emphasize the beat, we might pick up the tempo a little bit, but we are a marching band. And I think we need to get in the realm of jazz a little bit more in terms of how we listen to each other. And when I hear Joe mention listening as a musician, that's what I'm like, we really listen. Let's make something together. And it's going to get scary because we might be improvising and we might crash and burn. That's what happens sometimes. But there's something in that making space for grace instead of rushing to fill the gap with, okay, we're all feeling a little out of control, so let's get tighter. And I'm hopeful that necessity really is the mother of invention. And there's been so much good amidst all the pain, but there's been enough pain that I think people are willing to do some jazz and risk crash and burning a little bit in the name of let's just trust our guts and be playful a little bit here and move from that space rather than let's try to reassert control and authority. So make space for grace, drop the marching band, and let's play some jazz.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. As I mentioned before, some of us are going into break. I hope you have, maybe you do get part of that hibernation nap over the break and you do get some of that relaxing time to kind of finish out the home stretch here. I do want to conclude with some of the events that are happening ahead. But before I do that, Bill or Susan, do you want to just talk one more time for the audience about how someone who is interested in the Learning Lab would get involved And is there a deadline for application or kind of the nuts and bolts of that?
So we've got a website, and I'm assuming that you'll be sending out resources on this that we could link in the chat. And it is through UVM. So applications are rolling. We tend to keep them open as long as we can to get folks who are excited. It tends to be word of mouth in some ways, as long as and having conversations like this with the Vermont community is really helpful. So thank you for hosting us for that. But the application is pretty simple and straightforward. If you have an idea of an inquiry question and you just reach out to us, then we reach back to you and say, hey, let's have a conversation and talk about this. Bill?
All right. That sounds great. And we'll put this and post this when the video goes up. Also, our next conversation is happening on Thursday, May 19th. That's going to be, I believe, the last one for this, our 7th season. And don't forget also, if you are interested, the Middle Grades Institute Equity-Oriented Middle Grades Education is happening from June 27th to July 1st. That registration is open too. Thanks again, everybody, for dropping by. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful break and get some time to do the things that you like to do. Hopefully, you have a great return to school, and we will see you on May 19th. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice evening. Take care.
Thanks. Good to see you guys.
Bye.